Hello and welcome. I am Kate Clark-LeMay and I use pronouns she, her. I am the acting senior historian at the National Portrait Gallery and interim director of Portal, the Portrait Gallery's scholarly center. Thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation featuring Antonius-Tín and David Antonio Cruz in conversation with Taína Caragol. Although we're getting together today from different places, we gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. We all stand on land in a country still shaped by a history of slavery and racism. We gratefully acknowledge those who have come before us and those who continue to fight injustice today. At the National Portrait Gallery, we acknowledge that not all people have had equal access to the dominant modes of portraiture, nor did many have control over representation. This is especially the case for working class and people marginalized because of their sexuality, race, ethnicity, ability or disability, age, and class. We are so pleased to present today's event as part of the Tommie L. Pegues and Donald A. Capoccia Conversation series. We welcome our viewers who are zooming in from all over the world. You will find that the chat has been enabled, so you can compare notes about the lecture as we engage with our featured artists on the topic of portraiture and queer identity. You may also use the Q&A chat box to submit a question for the formal Q&A that will follow the conversation. When the landmark exhibition Hide, Seek, Difference and Desire in American Portraiture premiered in October of 2010, it became the first major museum show to take on the issue of LGBTQ+ subjectivity in portraiture. This exhibition was supported in part by two of our wonderful friends, Tommie Pegues and Donald Capoccia. Tommie has served as one of the National Portrait Gallery's commissioners since 2015, and he and Don have been dedicated supporters of the Portrait Gallery since 2008. Their continued friendship enables us to further our mission and explore the history of the United States through biography and identity. We extend our gratitude for their continued generosity and for making this ongoing virtual conversation series possible. And I'm delighted to relay that Tommie is joining us today. So now I would like to invite him to come online and say a few words.
Thank you, Kate. Happy to be here this evening. My husband, Don, is still stuck in traffic, so he might show up any moment. It has been a true honor to serve on the commission of the National Portrait Gallery and learn from the curators and historians and educators. In supporting this program, Don and I are honored to have created a safe space to discuss critical issues around the LGBTQ+ identity and artistic production. We were thrilled when the Portrait Gallery's director, Kim Sayet, broached this idea with us. Following the inauguration of the series in 2020, we focused on the 10-year anniversary of Hide, Seek, Difference and Desire in American Portraiture. We look forward to continued conversations that expand our shared understanding of our communities, our country, and each other. We need that now more than ever. I can't express how exciting it is to hear from contemporary artists today about the topic. So thank you all for being here, for your curiosity, and for joining us in the belief that portraiture is powerful. Kate, I will hand this back to you.
Thank you so much, Tommie and Don. And what fun. I know that we're all distant, but it's great to be able to see you today. Now let me introduce my inspiring colleague, the Portrait Gallery's curator of painting and sculpture and Latinx art and history, Dr. Taína Caragol, who will be moderating today's conversation. Not only is Taína a real pleasure to work with, but she's also a path breaker, and I feel great pride in being able to call her my colleague, because since her hiring in 2013, she has significantly increased the representation of Latinx historical figures and artists at the Portrait Gallery through acquisitions and also through curating exhibitions such as One Life, Dolores Huerta, Unseen, Our Past in a New Light, Ken Gonzalez Day and Titus Kaphar, and the Outwin 2019 American Portraiture Today. So with that, I will hand this over to Taína with gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that warm and generous introduction. I am delighted to be collaborating with you in this portal event tonight. Thank you again, Tommie and Don, for your generous support and your constant support for so many years. And thank you as well, Jackie Petito, Haley Kroll, for your logistical and technical help in tonight's program, and Claire Baldi for your closed captioning of the program. Our guests tonight, Antonius-Tín and David Antonio Cruz, are finalists in the 2019 edition of the Portrait Gallery's triennial Outwin Boochever Portrait Competition, and their work is on view in the resulting traveling show, the Outwin American Portraiture Today, currently at the Namur Museum in Springfield, Massachusetts, where we will also host several Outwin public programs between January 28 and February 18 as part of their Museum a la carte launch series. You can check out their website for more details and to register. We are deeply grateful to Virginia Outwin Boochever, who as a docent at the National Portrait Gallery for almost 20 years, endowed this competition as a gift to the nation. Thank you also to the members of the Outwin and Boochever families who continue her legacy and are joining us tonight. Edition after edition, the competition and its resulting show are one of the most anticipated events at the National Portrait Gallery, as they always deliver an expansive view of how artists across the United States and beyond are engaging with portraiture, continuing its tradition, pushing its boundaries to create absolutely moving works of art. And the work of Antonius-Tín and David Antonio Cruz is a testament to that. I had the pleasure of co-curating the 2019 Outwin American Portraiture Today exhibition, which Dorothy Moss directed as director of the competition. And I have the pleasure of taking the helm as director and co-curating the final show in 2022 with Leslie Ureña, curator of photographs at the Portrait Gallery. We want to remind all artists from the US, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, Guam, and the Commonwealth of American Samoa that the call for entries for the 2022 edition of the competition is open until January 29. The rules and platform to submit your portraits are accessible on our website, portraitcompetition.si.edu, portraitcompetition.si.edu. Please visit our website, enter your recently created portraits. We are absolutely excited about this upcoming edition, and we have a fabulous jury panel. The winner of the competition wins $25,000 and the opportunity to create a commissioned portrait for the National Portrait Gallery. And now I have the pleasure to introduce our guests tonight. Antonius Bui is a spontaneous shapeshifter and polydisciplinary artist with roots all over the country. They play in the realms of hand-cut paper, community engagement, performance, and soft sculpture to visualize hybrid identities and histories that confront the unsettling present. Their identity as a queer, gender-fluid Vietnamese American informs the way they employ beauty as a refuge for fellow marginalized communities. Since graduating with a BFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art, they have been fortunate enough to receive fellowships from Halcyon Arts Lab, Yaddo, Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, Cala Art Institute, and the Fine Arts Work Center. David Antonio Cruz is a multidisciplinary artist and professor of the practice in painting and drawing at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts at Tufts University. Cruz fuses painting and performance to explore the visibility and intersectionality of brown and Black and queer bodies. Cruz received a BFA in painting from Pratt Institute and an MFA from Yale University. Recent residencies include the Lower Manhattan Community Council Workspace Residency, Project for Empty Space Social Impact Residency, and Brick Workspace. Cruz's work was first featured at the National Portrait Gallery in 2014 in our traveling exhibition, Portraiture Now, Staging the Self. And it has also been shown at El Museo del Barrio, the Brooklyn Museum, Performa 13, and the Bronx Museum of Art. His fellowships and awards include the Joan Mitchell Foundation Painters and Sculptors Grant, the Franklin Furnace Fund Award, and the Urban Artists Initiative Award, and also the Queer Mentorship Fellowship. Thank you so much, Antonius and David Antonio, for accepting our invitation to be on this virtual conversation today. And if we could start by discussing your work in the Outwin. Who does your portrait represent? Why did you create it? How does it relate to your larger artistic practice? Can we start with you, perhaps, Antonius, discussing Vanguard, please?
Of course. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Taína. It is truly an honor to share space with you and the entire National Portrait Gallery team. Working with y'all does not feel like work whatsoever, and I look forward to every Zoom call. Also, I'd like to thank everyone for being here. I'm certain that all of us are exhausted, all zoomed out, but you came here and I'm so grateful to be present with you all. This piece, Vanguard, is a hand-cut paper portrait of Can Aiden Nguyen, a friend, a colleague, a cis, who is also one of the co-founders of Vanguard, a transnational zine uplifting LGBTQIA+ Viet people. Firstly, I did this piece and continue to create portraits of Aiden because I love and admire them. They are a cosmic soul who continues to be in a state of transformation, of becoming, refusing singularity, refusing whiteness, refusing binaries, refusing heteronormativity, and refusing silence. And these refusals are replicated in the hand-cut paper techniques. As I remove more and more of the paper, a counter-identity is formed. And this piece is actually the first in an ongoing series of Slasian American portraits that seems to be growing into its own mythology. Let's call it the remodel minority mythology. In terms of how this piece works in the grand scheme of my greater practice, I would say I'm always grappling with the ideas of safety, freedom, a queer utopia. Yeah.
That is beautiful. And we have that beautiful portrait of Aiden next to their portrait, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Wonderful. Thank you, Antonius. What about you, David Antonio? Can you talk about your portrait of April and June in the Outwin Boochever Portrait Competition? The boys don't play nice with anyone, portrait of April and June.
Thank you. First of all, thank you again for inviting me. This is such an honor, and also to be able to share with Antonius and just see how our works are so intertwined, and so it's just really beautiful. Just getting to talk the last few weeks, and so the boys don't ever play nice with anyone. It's a portrait of April and June, and there are a couple from Harlem, and like Antonius, I tend to paint, especially for the Dirty Boy Girls series. It's a body of work that I've been working on for a while. I've been bringing in folks from the community, folks that either I feel like vibrate within the community, either locally contributing somehow to the community. And so it took a while to get them to pose. And so for Dirty Boy Girls series, the whole body of work has been about love, touch, connectivity, breaking social norms, looking at historical portrait paintings and that rigidity and breaking it. So in a sense, creating a space for us in a sense. And so I do think of them as somewhat messy because of like this idea of the performative aspect of bringing people in. And so having June and April come in was really, really special. Known them for a while. It took quite a bit of convincing. And for me, when you come into my studio, you're not sitting. I don't really believe in sitting for me. It's really much an engagement, a conversation. It's dress up. We talk about clothes and fashion, and so there's laughter and play. And so it's this beautiful engagement that I am realizing that as time goes by, it's been such a huge part of the work, that play. And so with it, you know, at the moment, then that leads into that moment where I do ask for that pose, that unthinkable thing of sliding or leaning and creating and breaking those ideas of what we think how a sitter should sit. And so that's how this piece came about.
That is fascinating. I mean, many ideas there, the concept of the refusals in Antonius's work, and of admiration for kindred souls, for what they represent within your own community, for both of you. And I think these are subjects that will come up through our conversation. And I mean, something that I find very interesting as a curator at the National Portrait Gallery is that, you know, in our engagement with contemporary artists, sometimes we follow their work and we approach them one day and we say, oh, your portraits are so amazing. And they're like, oh, I never thought about them as portraits. While some other artists have a very conscious engagement with that genre. Can you each talk about your relationship to portraiture? Is it a genre that you engage with among many, or that you focus on solely? Is it a casual sort of relationship, or is it a very steady and continuous engagement? And feel free to jump in, and you know, David, Antonio, if you want to continue.
I think of it as, you know, it's so strange because, like, you know, I've always painted people. You know, it's the thing that I do. I'm obsessed with skin and being and existing in a space and owning a space. And so, but yet somehow I hardly think of myself as that. I'm constantly, you know, it's a casual relationship with it. I'm interested in representation. I'm interested in how history looks at bodies and what it tells. But yet when I engage with folks, I'm really interested in that, like in there being the idea of existence. And so sometimes I think of the work as a commentary on society versus the one. As a reflection of us. And so that's why sometimes I don't think of them as the straight up or idea of portraiture in that sense, you know, because like it isn't that fixed for me. It's something that's constantly shifting, and how, you know, because of that play and element in it. And so I was thinking earlier, how far does this go back for me? And I just remember people coming in, friends coming in up in high school, and you know, the idea of me dressing them and photographing them and lighting them and promising that they will have to sit for me. And so, you know, I don't think of it in a traditional way. No one's ever sat for me. I don't believe in this idea of sitting for me, because like, taking someone's time, it's so enough that you're giving of your essence to be a part of the work and the voyage and what I'm thinking about. I mean, for example, this piece, the Rainy Days Should Come With a Slice of Mango, is a piece that was shown before as part of a chocolate work, and someone did come in for this, and it's a double portrait, and in it, you know, it is a commentary about society and about brownness and blackness and erasures, and how we talk about race within the country. And so it is beyond just a representation of him. It is more than that. And so that's why I constantly think of it as casual versus so fixed, whereas it's just a person. And to me, there's so much more to them, you know, and so anything that falls within that becomes really private and not within the practice I engage or show within like a contemporary setting. You know, the traditional way of looking at portrait to me is like too rigid. It's just, I like the mess. The messiness is the beauty, and that's where I'm constantly gaining for, and that's why no one sits in my paintings. Like, you know, it's that grittiness that I love, and you know, I kind of want to mess it up, and so in that way, I don't. Yeah, it's.
I know you embrace that messiness, and it's beautiful. It's very much part of the beauty of your work, and I won't refer to your subjects as sitters anymore.
I don't, you know,
at the portrait gallery, we talk about the sitter all the time.
You know, anyone that comes in, you know, at this point, you know, I knows they're not going to sit. You know, in fact, you know, I'll have you sit for a second so that you get it all out of your system. And then it's like, okay, we're going to do a little bit of this. And then we're going to move this way. And I said, it's going to be okay. We're going to work through this. And then it becomes this idea of performance. So it's more than just the sitting. It's breaking down, and it's the performance of living in it. And that's the beauty that I'm interested in.
Definitely. Yeah. What about you, Antonius?
Yeah, I love how you are liberating the form of portraiture, David Antonio, because you bring up this idea of play and relationship building. And for me, the history of like capital P portraiture has been anything but communal. It's been a weapon of genocide. It's been a technology used by white supremacists to solidify narratives that make marginalized communities less than. And I love the introduction where portraiture is contradictory. It is powerful, but it is so exclusionary. So like when I think about my first encounters with images that were supposed to portray my people, my communities, they were oftentimes very dehumanizing, disembodying, stereotypical. I think about the Chinese Exclusion Act cartoons, yellow facing by like Mick Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's, Dr. Fu Manchu, and then seeing victims of the Vietnam War growing up my entire life. And these are like manufactured, marketed in order to keep us less than. And so I love that we are both working in the realm of portraiture and embracing our sloppiness, because yes, we are fabulous. Yes, we are prophets. We are reaching towards the queer horizon, this queer utopia, but we're imperfect, and we are learning to be in community with one another and embracing all of us. Like, we come as we are, and I think that's how we want our portraits to come out. Like my hand-cut paper portraits, they are so filled with flaws. Like, people are like, oh, it looks so gorgeous. It looks like machine made, but I know where all of the mistakes are. And I think that's part of our existence.
They're stunning, by the way.
They are stunning, yes. And a flaw there? Are you impossible to find? I mean, they're just incredible. They're amazing, intricate works of art and just breathtaking, really. And that's an interesting conversation about how many people, how many communities to have been left out of the picture in portraiture. And it's something that is very much something that we have present in our institutional curatorial practice at the National Portrait Gallery, is something that is very important as a seed concept of the Outwin Boochever Portrait Competition, which also pushes the boundaries of portraiture. And in this last edition, and in the previous ones too, we have seen a real interest from artists in representing those who have been underrepresented. And Antonius, you started talking about the Asian Exclusionary Act, about refugees of the Vietnam War. I wanted to go in that direction with our conversation with both of you, because your work explores queer identity, and also much of it addresses your cultural background and family histories of migration. For you, David Antonio, as the child of Puerto Rican migrants in Philadelphia, And for you, Antonius, as the child of refugees of the Vietnam War, growing up in the Bronx, and I think later in Houston, right? So if you could talk about that, if you could talk about, can you shed light on your exploration of cultural background, gender identity, and sexuality as a generative force in your work? Antonius, maybe you want to go ahead.
Yeah, wow. When I think about when so much of your cultural backgrounds are not readily available due to war, AIDS, displacement, lack of resources and access, that exploration almost feels inevitable, necessary, and urgent. And so much of my work is searching for remnants to hold on to call my own, and then complicating it, and then expanding our notions of what Vietnamese-ness looks like, queerness looks like. And I love that we bring up, I guess, representation, because more than ever we see queer artists, BIPOC artists, like Black, Indigenous, people of color artists, but I am definitely skeptical of that as well. I am thinking a lot about this conversation between Legacy Russell, an American artist, talking about how representation does this job of restorative dignity, but that doesn't necessarily equate to restorative justice. And so I constantly question, what does it mean to be consumed by predominantly white audiences more than ever? And what are our portraits really doing? And that's something that it's difficult to grapple with when you see such an absence of yourself and you want to fill that void, but at the same time, are you fulfilling the narrative that whiteness wants you to? Are you simply feeding this machine of the art industry? And I constantly question, like, how colonized is my imagination? And yeah, I think these are ideas I'm constantly thinking about as I'm doing my work. And yeah, where does one even begin with cultural backgrounds, like child of Vietnamese refugees, the Catholic Church being one of the greatest sponsors of Vietnamese refugees, and then me being a closeted queerdo with all this shame because of the transphobia, homophobia, and sexism within the church, and then this desire for assimilation and the indebtedness to whiteness that my parents embody. I don't know, that's all to say I'm like this recovering Vietnamese Catholic that is trying to piece my life together, and art has been a vehicle for that, one of many vehicles.
David Antonio.
That was beautifully said. I mean, it's something that I think as a queer artist of color, or artists of color, it's something that we're constantly negotiating with. This image of the Puerto Rican Pieta, it's one that, it's one of my earlier works, and so much of our experiences, I think we want to see ourselves, we want to see us out, because we don't have that space. There's nothing that reflects us or it speaks of our experience or feels that, especially as a queer person, feeling that we belong. We hope to find that within an audience or out there to feel like we belong. And growing up in the 70s, 80s in Philadelphia, in two very very religious conservative household, and a conservative household, it was a level of silence, of not being able to understand my queerness or what it was to be a person, a gay, Latino, a person growing up in Philadelphia. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do I find where to talk or reach out? And, I spend so much of that time silent. And so for me, the Hibara work, this body of work, was really about being present, or shouting from a corner, and I feel like the work's still doing that. I still feel like that we're still needing to shout. And for this, I mean, the whole idea of dress up, I mean, I dressed my mother up in very traditional, like bomba clothing, and playing with like stereotypes of Latino-ness and masculinity, and and I wanted to play with those and try to understand where did I fit in, where did my body fit within these roles that have been lunged on me, how did I fit, where did I fit and as a person. And so for this painting, it was actually the last one that I painted with my mother, of my mother. It was really challenging. It was just like actually using your body as a vehicle to seek the thing that you were looking for all this time. And the Hibata work was that. And, and it's something that I think like haunts me through my work still. This work is about 15 years old and it still haunts me. I'm still trying to think about what is home. And sometimes it's located within a body or it's located within a space and an abstracted, like colorful, dense world. Because being first generation or being first, not understanding culturally where you fit in and how you fit in, and also, not only sexually, but as a person of color, you're constantly this idea of where do you belong. Since I moved out of New York, the one question I constantly hear is that, where are you from? As you don't belong here. And so there's that question that we're constantly going back about, how do we own our space and own that so that we're not defined by others, but that is always messy and it's always ever changing because that space is not fixed. And so, yeah.
Pretty much that question of being queer and together with the cultural background are inseparable in your work.
It absolutely is. I can't. I mean, even in the performative work, the language is a thing. I'm constantly playing around with the wording in my work. It goes back between English and Spanish, and the queer part is inserted right into the language, and how we subvert those things, the music, and also the symbolism that wasn't present in the work, in the Hibata work. But now, the last few years, I've been just thinking about symbolism that are cultural, that go back and forth, and that are loaded with a lot of like queer subjective, that is loaded with queer subtext within it, that is not normally talked about, but you've grown up, and then all of a sudden you're realizing all these things are part of this. Trying that relationship with my queerness and my Latino-ness.
We have a question from the audience that I would, since we're on this topic, that I would like to interject for Antonius-Tín. Someone says, I love the phrase you used of indebtedness to whiteness. Could you speak about how you use your art to challenge these? Thank you.
Yeah, I love that we're using the word queer a lot, which we are reclaiming as a society.
Yes.
And something that I constantly remind myself is that queer is a verb. It means to like dismantle, to challenge, disrupt, to demand more. And the hand-cut paper portraits are just one facet of my very broad practice, similar to David Antonio. I think it's almost like this polydisciplinariness is inherent in queerness, this shape-shifting, this refusal of singularity and being contained. And that refusal to be legible all the time, I think it contrasts to whiteness. Whiteness always demands language in order to own it. And we are constantly, we're refusing a lot. Like, for instance, I think about your paintings, how you don't give us everything. There's a lot of abstraction, ambiguous backgrounds, and you keep a lot to yourself.
There's a lot.
Yeah, and I think that preservation of one's own privacy and dignity is so powerful.
My titles always been that. And it's the question is like, well, why do you do that? And it's just like, well, something has to be for me, like something belongs to just me. And they're funny. We've their poetry, their jokes, but and they're very personal always. And it's just the one part that it isn't translatable. Really, it isn't. It's not translatable in a visual language, and it doesn't occupy the other language, you know. And like it doesn't exist within other spaces. It's really something that is for us. And I think a lot, especially like in my performative work, so much of it is a celebration of queerness, brownness, and blackness. I mean, when we perform, and I love when role folks within the community are just giggling because it's like, oh, this was just for you. You understand what I'm saying. And, you know, part of the audience might actually not know what's going on, but it's just celebration of us and having a moment that is just inherent and queer in us. And, you know,
A moment ago, I think you both mentioned the word space, which is, I think, very important in your work. And it also came up in our conversations in preparation for this event. You talked about providing a space for people like you, for your community, and also of taking up space in the museum, in the gallery, in the public space in general. And I think it's also, as Antonius was just alluding to, you know, there's also that idea in a more abstract way in both of your work, you know, in how you use positive and negative space in ways that are sometimes interchangeable, right? You know, this idea that positive space is what you have in front of you, and that negative space is the background, sometimes doesn't apply to every work of yours. Background and foreground start to play with each other and our attention. Can you talk about that?
That's my image. I do think about the idea of positive and negative space, like the idea that something is good inherently and something is bad, that one occupies and one doesn't, the one is filled and the other space is empty. And it, you know, the idea that this is a negative space because it's not being occupied, but the second that my hand waves it, it activates that space. So there is four is present and therefore is positive. And, you know, within the works lately, especially that I've been thinking about, the backgrounds have been a space of thinking about, like, what is a background? What is a shadowy space? What exists within the shadow space? What is a cruising space? You know, what is a dark or a closeted space? What exists within that darkness? And so much of the color blocking in the painting as well is also dealing with the idea of void and infinite space. And what does that really, how does, you know, that space that it occupies within our mind and that relationship to a body? And so lately I've just really been thinking about that positive and negative space and how to eradicate that line between the two. As even really thinking about a body and how we identify queer bodies or identify, you know, people of color, like how we talked about, like in that space. And so, so much of it has been creating a space or a boundary between positive, negative that actually completely complicate the meaning of it, and then flip itself and then create itself over it and create a mark that is negating the idea of a positive and a negative space within it. And so that there is no longer a space, there is no depth, it is just time and exists just right on the surface. And, you know, I speak of ghosts a lot, the idea that that haunts you. And so the drawing exists right on the surface, but it's one within the background. There is no background, there is no space in it. And so I'm fascinated by how we break that space. And so I've been thinking a lot about that idea of positive and negative space and how we attribute or label things as such, because like inherent, I think is part of my religious upbringing, the idea of in order to have good, you must have bad. But what happens when you eradicate or erase those things, and what happens, what happens to that space and that, so yeah.
Ooh, so many juicy tidbits, David Antonio. Like, I do not even know where to begin. I think I'm gonna first touch upon like that in-between time that you bring up when the positive and negative have this dance. And so much of queer existence is intemporal space. Like in the clubs, dancing, within sex, cruising, there's all this uncertainty. And there are oftentimes no traces or remnants of our existence. It's a ghost of an action. And in so many ways, that is empowering, where we no longer need to prove existence to anyone. We simply live for ourselves. And at the same time, it's so detrimental to our history in so many ways. We live with so many ghosts. I love that word. I constantly think of ghosts and hauntings. The ghosts that exist within archives, those that were never honored. And I think my piece on the screen right here is an example. It's very different than Vanguard, which is present in the competition. I've decided to start leaving a lot of backgrounds completely filled in. They start to blend in with the body. And yeah, the idea of the human skin starts to morph. The distinction between nature, space, and our bodies become blurrier. And I think that really hints at this existence that we all strive for, this reality where hopefully there are no borders. There are no nations, there are no categories. And that lack of is something that I'm really interested in and that I want to push within my work, allowing more just space for people to project their own desires and feelings. What is on Aiden's hand right now? What are the tattoos that are not completely legible showing? What kind of spaces can Aiden exist in? What is Aiden wearing? And not defining that completely, but allowing it for a constant state of interpretation.
I mean, that is definitely the beauty of like, when I think of like queerness and, the fight of like, fighting against that rigidity of being labeled or the categorized thing. And so how to produce work that eradicates those things so that it can be seen or talked about without those things, which is probably the most complicated thing in the world, is to how to talk about something without labeling, because we live in a society that everything needs to label, or we're forced to. We have to name it, define it, otherwise it doesn't quite exist. And how to define something that is not quite, the language hasn't been developed for, or it's not definable. And so that, when the hand is missing, which I love, like that space, that intertwine of nature and body, what is that? What is that special moment? How does that spirituality translate to the physical? And it's just a gorgeous moment. And that's, I think, one of the things that I've been thinking so much about, because for a long time I've been obsessed with the void, and it's like, well, what is the void in your head? Why are you so obsessed with a thing that's so dense that it's so rich and yummy, but you're like, you can fall right into it, but why? Why is it that you want us to always fall in? And lately I've been thinking about, well, what about the shadowy space, the space that is right behind that void that is not, our psyche in it? Like, how do we define those things? And, I think that as like queer culture expands and moves out of some of the ways that we talked about or historically been talked about, have evolved and changed, and those spaces will change as well. But that shadowy space is the messy space in my work. So.
Yes, and David Antonio, I think speaking about that union of subject and nature in Antonius's work, the work that we had previously on the screen by you is very much about that too, right? You had all that foliage. If you could talk a little bit about.
Yes, you know, I've been thinking a lot about childhood a lot, and it's just been thinking about foliage and their interactions and our memories in it. And so all the foliage in it really comes from memories that don't quite exist in photographs, because like those were lost. So something we talked about, the idea of loss and imagery and how we reimagine a history or reimagine a family or a world. And I've been kind of reimagining the space between my grandparents' home and my parents' home, that walk in Puerto Rico between the two houses, and that is flipped over and over and over again, and then looking at ideas of like, not ideas, but actual footage from like Caribbean and West Africa, and trees and vegetations that actually exist within two spaces. And so the body is intertwined in it, but it's not it, it's actually almost being birthed out of it. And so it's living and coming from that space.
So if you look very closely at this work, you will see that interplay also of foreground and background and hidden portraits within it, right?
Yeah. I love the little, like what appears to be like tattoos in your pieces, that the bodies are almost reaching out of the skin out into the back. And so it's bringing the two connecting. Anyway, it's gorgeous.
I wanted to ask you a question that has been very much in our minds as workers in the cultural field. How has the pandemic affected your everyday lives and your process of making art? What have you been working on these past few months that have made so difficult, social interaction?
Ooh, well, COVID-19 has made it extremely clear that our previous notions of normal are racist, unsustainable, and deadly. And I think in the beginning of the pandemic, we were all taking time to slow down, to really dream of a new radical reality, and to reevaluate what we're making, and to critique our institutions to understand that we are a part of them, and to re-envision that relationship. And now it feels like we're all being thrown into this new year at this accelerated pace, being demanded more than ever to continue making work. And I want to slow down. Like, I want to take time to continue dreaming anew and expand our definitions of art, success, and beauty. So I really want to ask everyone to continue slowing down, to enter queer time, to refuse capitalism. Yeah, that's where my mind's at.
Images this thing. I'm right with you. It's like, yeah, it started off in a way of like thinking, really reflecting and slowing down. And as that question was just like, what is it that you want to make right now that will reflect what's happening culturally? The idea of breath so much was something that I was thinking about and continue to think about. I also, that question I think really started popping up in the drawings, and this was the idea of what was home and who was our family and how did we connect, because not being able to really connect physically. I mean, when you make work about dealing with people physically and bringing them in and celebrating or being part of a community, and that's taken away, how do you continue making work? Or and so for me, it was it took a while, and I really started thinking about the things that I was missing, and I think more than ever, to make work that was challenging those structures that were happening or that were being brought forth, and they're just out there right now that we're constantly fighting against. And so it was strange, but it kind of like started thinking about a lot what my family was, you know, and I meant chosen family really, which is something that we think a lot about, you know, those are our structures, those are our love forces, those are the ones that uphold us. And so I kind of selfishly, I think, made a project, you know, which was a continuation of the Dirty Boy Girl series, to actually create a space so that I could connect to people again. And I wasn't bringing them into my studio, but creating a space where I wanted folks to tell me stories. And so it became about a lot about conversations about who they were, who do they think of family is to them, how do they meet? And, you know, it changed. I've been kind of thinking really differently about my practice. It's just been kind of more like just beautiful conversations and allowing people, just inviting them. And so I've been kind of thinking a lot, well, not kind of thinking, but I've been thinking a lot about families and what does family mean. And so bringing folks in, and allowing them to bring a crew of folks and say, this is my family, this is how we look, this is how we celebrate each other, and being part of the work. And so creating a space for that, which has been really wonderful to see the conversations that are being had in that space. Also, it almost feels like a safe party in a sense, but a performative act, a sense of defiance, of fighting against the norms. This has been kind of fun to just look at like the rigidity of portraiture in a sense, and really like, no, make it as the posing as a sense of like pushing against all those norms. And so there's a level of play in this work that I've been working on right now, and touch, but it's just kind of like resistance, and yet done in a playful and ownership way. And so this is one of the pieces from this work that I've been working on right now. And it's just really unlike previous times where I invite a series of folks. This has been really much about a conversation with folks and talking to them about family structures and what that means to them. And dress up and fashion and play and dance. It's really much a performance. And so I every time that I've gone in to set up a session, it's been quite joyful. There's been a lot of tears, a lot of laughter. To have that space for this kind of work. And so that's where I am right now. Yeah.
Oh my God, this painting brings me so much joy, David Antonio. I'm like, are they flirting? Are they in a death drop? Like, it is so exuberant and I want to be there with them. So I'm so happy that you have started this new body of work, and they almost exist in this ambiguous, luxurious, queer palace that I'm like, where is this? How do I get there? Do I time travel there? Let me know, you know?
I have this obsession with couches and the idea of sitting but not sitting. And so everyone knows that for this is like, you're coming to not sit, you know? And so it's this moment with two, and they're the two, Barry and June, actually. When I approached June, she mentioned Barry and why it was important for them to be posed with them. And I learned so much about their history together and them, one supporting the other as they were coming out. And so it was such a beautiful story, just like hearing them. And so they also, unlike a lot of my times where I normally bring a bunch of my performative costume stuff, they had to dress. So it was this really sense of ownership and party. And so, and they knew that they would end up upside down somehow. And so it's this beautiful intertwining of two figures of support. And if you really look, you realize that he is holding her.
And I also love your use of the word party. I think so often it's associated with frivolousness, but the party is the rehearsal for the revolution, honey, you know? Like,
yeah, I mean, historically in portraiture, it's just always been this lushness of if being able to be pictured, it means that you had some wealth and some access. And so there's this sense of like, you know, decadence. And it's like, well, why not us? Why can't we not be decadent? And why can't we just sit? Because we can. You know, and so it is that thing. It's like because we can, and so it's joyful, and I think of it, but it's also to me a sense of protest in a sense as well, because it's like refusing to conform to the social norms. It's like, no, I can be this way, I can behave this way, I can be those things, but that's not the authentic experience, or that is not expensive, authentic voice, you know, and so. You know, on the selfish side, like it brings me joy, and I'm so glad to hear, Anthony, that is you finally so joyful, because it has been, I think, in this moment where there's things are really challenging, things are really hard. It's been nice to sometimes just watch the people come in and socially distance in a way, and just have a space where they're like just talking, because they haven't seen each other in months. They haven't been allowed to see each other, and you know, it's like as an artist, I'm just creating a space for that to happen, and that's been really. And I selfishly, I feel like, oh, I get so much joy because I don't see anyone, you know, I'm stuck, you know. But.
Yeah, and you talked to me, David Antonio, about the logistical details, you know, of all this planning for these portraits in particular. You know how the space has been, you know, is a wonderful, large. Very large space in New York City that has been facilitated by dear common friends, who are patrons of Puerto Rican, New Yorker, and queer artists, and and how everyone goes masked and takes off their mask for a second for the photograph.
Yeah, it's we, you know, knowing that you're bringing your family, and it's like part of the project is like you must have this discussion with your family, you know, before you walk in. And I have this conversation with you, but you are defining who are your family, so you're going to have this conversation with them, and these are the rules to the, you know, where you're coming in. You know, everything has to be sanitized before and after. It's a really big space. Everything has been, you know, set up in a way that hope, you know, for us to everyone be safe, and yet have a space for at least for a couple minutes to just engage, because folks just haven't been able to see each other at all, you know.
So speaking about parties and celebrations, I feel like this conversation has been so beautiful and joyful, and I thank you for letting me partake in that conversation and play with both of you. We have lots of people interested in how you approach your own medium. There's a couple of questions that I want to address before we go. One of them is, how does your medium of choice relate to your own personal quest of representing queerness in portraiture? So when I think about your medium of choice, as shown in these paintings, but in these works, it's painting. You have, yes, both of you do performance art, but in these slides, I'm thinking of the paintings and of the paper cut works. And Antonius, many people are very curious about how you make your paper cut works, if they're machine cut or hand cut. What kinds of tools do you use?
Yeah, I'd like to thank my uninsured hand for being able to carry my hot pink X-Acto knife. It's my trusty companion. But I think similar to both of us, it starts off with relationship building, first and foremost, and just loving our models, our sitters, and wanting to showcase to the world the magic and brilliance that we see within them, and like understanding this is just a glimmer of their vastness.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because one of the things is like I can fall in love every time with the person that I'm working with. Like there's this love and joy. There's this intense beauty that radiates from folks, and that's always what I've been interested in, just really bringing out that beauty. I feel like there's so much ugliness and violence, that how to talk about us and our community in this kind of in a beautiful way. But it's not, about your question of, it's really not only about painting, it's about writing, it's about performance. It is, depending, I feel like there's different voices, but they're all centralized within that experience. They all generate different ideas, but they live within that space. And so there is a beauty in, within painting. I mean, I'm obsessed with the history of it. I mean, I'm obsessed with the material. Actually, I love the material more because I perform, because that reminds me of the private nature of making something. And you also mentioned, Antoni's, like magic. It's all magical. The idea that and I know that it's not like a big popular word in art, but there's something really magical sitting and spending time and dedicating to the creation of something. That aspect of making something is quite. It's a choice. To sit and take this much time to make something, but it varies. It's not one thing. It's not one form.
Thank you so much to both of you. And with that choice for taking the time to create that magic, we leave you. Thank you so much to our audience for being part of this event. And thank you to Portal, and again to our generous sponsors, Tommie, Pegues, and Don Capoccia.
Thank you so much for asking me to be a part of this, and Antonius, to get to meet you and talk with you. And Taína, I've known you forever, for many, like 15 years. So thank you so much for being such a support.
Amen to that. Y'all are beautiful, magnificent. And thank you to the audience members who stuck with us too.
Thank you all so much. We're thrilled with this conversation, and I know that our audience members are as well. Before we end, I also want to invite everyone to join us again on Tuesday, February 16th at 5 p.m. on Zoom for the Greenberg-Steinhauser Forum in American Portraiture, which will feature a presentation by Gwendolyn Du Bois Shaw, exhibiting the First Ladies, a curator's perspective. She is the curator of that exhibition, and we know it's going to be terrific. So we invite everyone to join us then again. Thank you.